Hey, welcome back, everyone. I appreciate everyone joining us again for another episode of Bites and Brew, sponsored by Cape Endeavors Incorporated. Today, we are joined by Steve Bay, who we are honored and blessed to have. Steve, unfortunately, has made international fame and notoriety because he happened to be the unfortunate manager of a one Ed Snowden at the time that the traitorous bastard did what he did. We'll get into more about the view of Ed later, but I wanted to welcome Steve to the podcast and not to rehash old wounds, but Steve, you actually better than anyone understand sort of the impactful nature of the insider threat and sort of a data breach and all data breaches. And so thank you for being on the podcast. I appreciate you joining us today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you, Terry. I'm thrilled to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, and for the audience, Steve and I go back way back. I think we first met in 2010 or so, I guess maybe. And we worked in some of the same programs inside that community. But Steve, just for everyone's benefit, before we sort of get into the more pointed areas of the conversation, you didn't just kind of arrive at this point in your life. I mean, meaning that's not your defining moment. So, how did you sort of get to the NSA? What was your background coming up into that, and then sort of what's been your progress beyond that to where you are today? Just for
Sure, yeah. So yeah, it's been quite the 20 some odd year career. So I started out my career in 2001. I joined the Air Force, Airman E3, as a Persian Farsi linguist. So I went to DLI in Monterey for a couple of years, learned Farsi, got stationed at Fort Meade, Maryland with the agency. And there I was a linguist. I translated information. Kind of during that time, I learned how to be an intelligence analyst and how to do a variety of different skills. They taught me all about computer networking and IT and elements like that. And so kind of was able to marry all of that with my analysis and the work that I did, and kind of evolved over my years in the Air Force being operational, from being a pure linguist to being an intelligence analyst and starting to put the pieces of the puzzle together, et cetera. So when I separated from the Air Force in 2007, I signed on as a defense contractor with Booz Allen, continuing to work in the agency. And there, I guess I did well enough in the interview where they thought I was a cyber guru. So they moved me into NSA Cyber Shop, and I started doing intelligence around cybersecurity and helping out with investigations and incident responses and those sorts of things. So it was kind of from there where I got my kind of started making my career move forward pretty well. And working with Booz Allen was great. I really enjoyed working there. And they asked me in 2011 to move to Hawaii to run our NSA Hawaii business and continue to support some of our customers out in Hawaii. And that was a really exciting opportunity. My wife and I are both very enthused about it. And so we went out there and set up shop. And that's, I think, where you and I met, Terry, and began to work together. And I did a lot of great projects. About a year and a half in, 2 years into that time there, I had a couple job openings where I needed an intelligence analyst, plus somebody who was highly technical, really understood cybersecurity. Actually, I had two openings in particular. And I was trying to find and I guess we'll get into the story here in a bit, but I was trying to find kind of the unicorn on Hawaii, right? Somebody who's got the advanced technical skills, plus intelligence analysis, plus the full scope security clearance. And that's kind of what led me into running into Snowden, and we can, if you want, dive into that more later. But yeah, I ended up running into Snowden, who didn't meet all of those qualifications, but came pretty close and kind of checked the boxes that we needed overall. And I hired Ed. And after about a month and a half of working for me, he disappeared on me and did what he did, and and released all that information out to the public. And that kind of changed the course of my life and career. I really enjoyed working in intelligence. It's my passion, one of my passions in life, my primary passion probably, is international affairs, global politics. It's something I just love. I watch a lot of podcasts on it, and I love pontificating around it, those topics, etc. And having a job working in intelligence really allowed me to take some of the skills I'd developed throughout my life and marry it with the international affairs stuff, and kind of kept me plugged in. And I really enjoyed the work. And so, unfortunately, shortly after the Snowden event happened, I lost my access to the agency. It's kind of left floundering a bit, and fortunately landed on my feet. Booz Allen was able to move me over to their commercial consulting business, and I moved over to cybersecurity full time. And so over the last 13 years now, well, 12 years, I suppose. Over the last 12 years, I've been in commercial cybersecurity, where I've been a consultant. I've been a CISO. I'm a CISO today. And have run and built information security programs, et cetera. So, where I guess that, things that all that ends well is well, I guess, whatever that phrase is. But, yeah, it was definitely a chaotic time in my life, but I've been able to, like most people, we're resilient and push forward and been able to build a solid career.
Yeah, I think that's really important, and I mean, we'll dive into sort of the Ed Snowden piece here in a bit, but I don't want some of the more human aspects of what you went through as a leader during this time period, and the fact that you did like reinvent yourself to a certain degree and come back stronger, better, faster, as they say. And I think that's a part of the sort of the instant response cycle that we don't pay enough attention to. Like I'd once written a paper where I likened sort of the emotional roller coaster that happens during something like this to the Kubler-Ross grief cycle, right? Where you go through the anger, then denial, and the bargaining, and you go through all that to eventually come out the other side of acceptance. And a level of event like this truly is an emotional roller coaster. I mean, you want to be logical and technical about it, but I mean, God, the world came down around your ears from this perspective. I mean, as we were talking earlier, the ramifications of this are not only was it hugely impactful for national defense and security, real world assets around the world disappeared on us. You can fill in the blanks of what happened to those people. At the end of the day, this cost people their lives, and it cost you your career, which of course is nothing to sneeze at. But in all of that, you managed to come through on the other side. But I would like you to talk a little bit, sort of about the emotional roller coaster that you had to deal with. I mean, because I don't think people, even something like a ransomware activity where, your existential threat to the business is going on and all the stress and all the fingers are pointing at you and as a CISO and like that's a pressure cooker. And you had that times a million. And so what was sort of the human side, the emotional side that you had to deal with?
It's a great question. So first, let me point out and emphasize that I do a lot of speaking on this, and I've talked to groups about crisis management and about how we handle crises in our life. And one of the things that I always emphasize when I talk to groups is that we're all going to have crises in our career. Something that just goes terribly wrong, terribly awful. And my particular major crisis, and I've had plenty of crises in my career, but this was obviously the biggest. But even though mine,
let's hope it stays that way.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah,
for sure. So even though this one was at the global scale, it doesn't make my crisis any less of a crisis, or it doesn't make your crisis any less of a crisis for you, right? I being a CISO, I've worked in various incident responses, had to, whether it's helping my clients through it, helping my own company through them. They're incredibly stressful, incredibly emotional, and that emotional side of it always gets lost. So for me in this cycle, I mean, you mentioned the grief cycle, right? I mean, I learned going through this, I kind of went through it twice. I went through it very rapidly on June 9th, 2013, when the news broke that Ed was the guy behind these leaks. And it was that day, I think I went through that entire cycle at least once, right? It was anger, denial, frustration, acceptance, sucking it up, getting back into normalization. And then, broader kind of throughout over the next months, it was similar, right? Of going through into more probably unnoticeable way, but certainly affected me. So I guess starting with that day, I mean, we'd gone probably 3 or 4 days of that week in 2013 where the leaks had begun coming out. I think 3 news articles had hit the news that previous week, right? Saying that NSA is doing these various things and questioning their legality. And at this point, I had known Ed was missing, right? So we knew Ed was gone. We just thought he was out on medical leave. I didn't think ever until he revealed himself. Well, I personally didn't think it. I'll kind of elaborate on this in a sec. But I didn't really ever think that Ed was the guy behind these leaks. And the thought never came to mind to me except the day before, where one of my friends that I worked with, also one of your counterparts in the Army, we were close friends, and we were at a church event, and I was telling him all about my previous week of how, I was looking for Ed, and, I'm really worried about him, worried that he was dead somewhere because he'd ignored doctor's orders or whatever it may be. And, but we also got to talking about these leaks and how egregious they were, how misinformed they were, how, the interpretation of the data that was leaked out and presented, because I don't think any of us question the content of the material itself that was leaked in the factualness of it, but it was the interpretation of how NSA was doing those things and using those things and all that, where the lies really came in and the misconceptions came into play. And so we were talking about all that. And my friend stopped me. He said, "Steve, wouldn't it be crazy if Ed were the guy leaking all this stuff?" And that thought had never crossed my mind. And I was like, holy cow, like, there's no way Ed would do it. Not a chance. Ed would never do something like that. But man, if he did, it would be my absolute worst nightmare. And that was the day before the news broke. So that next morning, I was at church, and I was in the leadership of our congregation, and I came out of the meeting where my phone was off, and I turned my phone on, and it just blown up with missed phone calls and text messages. And it just so happened that the first text that I saw was from that friend of mine who texted me and said, "Sorry, man, looks like your worst nightmare came true," or something along those lines. And so I browsed to like CNN or Drudge Report or some one of those websites, and sure enough, Ed's face was staring right back at me. And I went into an empty room in the church, and I just had a meltdown. I mean, it was panic and fear and anger, every emotion you can think of, really fell on my shoulders. And really, no matter how irrational it was, the weight of the world really, I felt, sat on it, right? Because we were talking about things of global implication. I mean, you said it before, people's lives were at risk, and ultimately people's lives were lost from what the reports that are out there. And for me, it started out as, kind of a fear for myself, right? Like panic of, oh my gosh, I want to lose my job. How am I going to support my family? We're not going to be able to put food on the table, those sorts of things. To, me being the manager there, I had a team of 15 people, 13 to 15 people who worked on my team that, I felt responsible for. Like they're going to lose their jobs and so on and so forth, all the way up to global macro international affairs stuff, right? Booz Allen's going to lose all their government contracts. NSA is going to get shut down and not have any intelligence. Terrorists are going to run wild. China's going to take over the world. All these thoughts just randomly crashing down on me within a 3 to 5 minute period, if it was even that long. But I also recognized as I kind of got my gumption up, and granted, I ran home and pulled my wife into the room and kind of explained everything to her, and really melted down a second time on her shoulder. And really all I could say to her was, "It's him," over and over. And but I also knew that there's a time to lead, and I was a leader of the team, and I was a new manager. I'd only been leading the team, been a real leader of anything significant for about a year and a half when this happened, maybe 2 years, I guess. And but there's a lot I didn't know, and a lot I didn't expect, and I'd never expected anything like this. But I also, decided I had to step it up. So, one of the things I did was I kind of took a deep breath. I sat back and, still in shock, I think, still pretty overcome, but said, "You know what? Life moves on, and we're going to get through this." And throughout that day, I think one of the things I'm most proud about my initial response was I really thought a lot, long and hard, about the people that worked on my team and that reported to me. And so I've called everybody on the team. He'd only been on our team for a month and a half, so a couple people really knew him well. One of my good friends on the team that worked on my team, she had referred him as an employee referral, so she knew him fairly well. Whereas other folks were on different teams, different departments. We met him once at a team barbecue that we did, So all those emotions. So I really focused on getting them taken care of, and I think being able to direct my focus on the response and on making sure other people are okay, and kind of stop worrying about the impact on myself, probably helped me get through that day quite a bit. And then it was kind of over the next few weeks where things were still crazy and emotional, but again, trying to focus on making the best out of it. And I think the one thing that I overlooked, speaking on the personal side, is I really underestimated the impact it would have on me and my life and my family. Right. I think it ended up, I think longer term, unbeknownst to me, or when I say unbeknownst to me, I didn't realize the personal toll it took. And it certainly resulted in struggles with my marriage and my family and those sorts of things that became exacerbated, I think, because of the stress of dealing with such an event.
Oh, no doubt. I mean, no doubt at all. And for the benefit of the audience that may not know you, I was always struck by you as being one of the most moral, ethical, and calm kind of put together guys that I met on those programs. And so you struck me, and along like well before any of this, happened on your shoulders. That you were a very, very solid guy, and I was happy to be interacting with you. And so I think that that says a lot about you. It says a tremendous amount about you. Not only that you were able to sort of get through it, but that you were caring about the people you work for. And honestly, I think that's something that we also don't talk enough about. And one of the things I do, and when I'm doing virtual CISO counseling or IR crisis management, is that the people aspect is real. The reason I wanted to start with this is I have seen so many leaders who get caught in, and I use the Kubler-Ross grief cycle because they go into that denial, anger, blame storming, and then negotiating, just keep pushing, we'll get through this, and they're not understanding that the stress isn't just on you, CISO, you leader. It is across your team.
That's right.
And everyone is going through this pressure cooker, and you will burn people out. You can break people. God, thank God you didn't break under that crucible. You could have, and everyone would have understood. I actually don't think you would have come out as well on the other side had you broken,
Right.
because you were able to keep it together. But I don't think people spend enough time thinking about the impact to team members. And you do a lot of coaching now. So when you talk about these kind of things and handling the crisis, and I mean, I want this to sort of be about your lessons learned, not mine, but at the end of the day, what do you guide people? I mean, through that crucible, what are sort of the advice that you give?
Yeah, I think the advice that I give often is to, and then certainly lesson that I've applied for myself. Again, because I mentioned I was a fairly new manager, and I always have been, and I continue to be to some extent this guy who thinks he can handle anything, and I've got it all together and all that. When really I'm a mess inside in many respects, and got a lot of
Aren't we
my
all,
own
brother?
demons
Aren't
and
we
these
all?
things we've got to fight through and work through, right? And so one of the lessons I've applied is around preparation, right? You can never really predict exactly what the crisis is going to be that you're going to face, right? Now in cybersecurity, where I work, I can certainly predict that my company getting hacked or one of my customers getting hacked or something like that is a pretty high likelihood of happening, right? So I certainly can do a lot of prep in that, but you know, crisis can occur at almost any time, and what I've coached a lot of people on is to prepare to prepare yourself with how you're going to deal with that crisis, and establish kind of what are your boundaries or lines that you're not going to cross, right? How are you going to own up to it and live up to it and get through it without crossing, I guess, your own personal moral code? And granted, I don't know that anybody really ever perfectly adheres to that code during every moment of their life or every crisis or whatnot, right? We're humans. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to violate our own codes to some extent. But two things that really stuck out to me, and shoot, I just lost the second one. Hopefully, it comes back to me in a second. But two things that really stuck out to me
Welcome to
about
my
that
life.
day, and oh yeah, that's what it was. And things that I really took away as I kind of did a evaluation of how I performed that day, so to speak. Is the first, I was really surprised and shocked at the CYA response that kind of became like the initial hit, right? Of I have to protect myself, and wanting to cast off blame, or wanting to I guess protect other people, or to protect myself above all things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the um the urge to throw my hands up and be like, it wasn't Dave. Well, this wasn't me. It wasn't my fault. What, you don't blame me for it, was very, very strong. Um, and granted, I had nothing. I had nothing to do with what Ed did. Right? I mean, yeah, I was his manager. I hired him at Booz Allen, but I didn't give him a security clearance. I didn't process his security clearance. He already had access to the agency. You know, and granted, there are things I could have done better. But I certainly had no indication or idea of what he was about to do when he did it. Um, so yeah, not that I didn't, but one of the things that I think really led to a successful response on my part, because our team, the team, contractors get a bad rap a lot in government spaces, in my
Yeah,
experience.
and they
Um,
shouldn't, but yeah.
but what our team had a pretty good reputation, particularly our
Yeah.
entire contract, and we were in pretty high demand across the agency. And so, not only after this happened did we not lose any of the work that we had, we were able to backfill Ed's spot because the team that he worked on was still needed the support. We had within the 2 months that I stayed at the agency until I was removed. We actually had two other clients come to us and say, "Hey, we want you guys to come help us." And I think that's a testament to my team and the great work that they did. But also, I think that had I gone into the initial response and not taken ownership of it, and I think it would have really looked poorly. Like the next day, the first day back at work after the news broke, I went in and met with the director of NSA Hawaii. And my initial comment, and this is the same thing when I went to talk to the team lead that I knew very well that Snowden supported, was, this is on me. How can I help? Right. I took the blame for it, or at least I tried to, and nobody really blamed me. Right. But nobody wants you to come in and act like the victim. Right. They want someone to take ownership. And
Yeah.
so those are the two big lessons I really took away when it comes to dealing with crisis is if you're the responsible or accountable party, even if you had nothing to do with it, come in with the attitude of, I'm going to what can I do to help, and this is, let me tackle it, right? And the second thing is have that kind of moral code, and kind of have that, those ethical lines that you're not going to cross, and be
It's
determined to stick to those, because man, that temptation to cross ethical lines was way stronger than I expected it to be, and luckily I didn't,
yeah.
but it was very strong.
Yeah, and I mean it's always deflecting or shifting blame is an easy
Right.
way out, and
Yeah.
unfortunately, too many leaders take that. And I know for a fact that you didn't. I do want to sort of tee up uh, sort of a tangential line.
Yeah.
So Snowden, by the way, for the audience's purpose, like I view Snowden as an absolute traitor. We can get into a lot of the reasons why that is in fact actually the case. Not, I don't know why he's been made a hero by the hacker community, which I love and hold very dear to my heart. And I understand through misinformation why some people might think that, but the reality is, this was an ugly form of treason, in my opinion. But that said, Snowden, I guess the only way I could characterize him is a very polished sociopath, probably psychopath. Because at the end of the day, I mean, you and I, we both had the same, polygraph test. We had the same background test. We had the same level of clearances. We had all the same things. We had all the vetting you can do to someone. Like literally everything you can do to vet someone. You and I and Snowden all went through that same process, right? And it
Right.
came out on the other side. And effectively, you'd almost have to be a sociopath to lie your way through that, which is, in fact, obviously later on, what bore out is that he did, in fact, he was very, very deliberate in his forethought on
Yeah.
what programs he was going to get access to, what job he was going to apply to. This was all malice and forethought, which we can talk about just a little bit. But all of that said, the premise of my question is, like, this was a deliberate insider, like to conduct nation state level espionage.
That's right.
Does anybody I mean, so it begs the question, we talk about insider training and inside awareness. This would kind of put a big bullshit flag on all of that, going like, I don't think any of that would have like helped. But now that you've got that malicious insider, is it auditing? Is it like, what would have helped identify this, like in retrospect? Not getting into
Yeah.
specifics, we can't talk about programs we worked on, but
Right.
like if you're advising someone about an insider, let's just assume they're a sociopath.
Yep.
How do you then make it better for a CISO or the security team to try to find these type of people, as an early warning?
Well, to your point, Terry, you're never going to get 100%, right? And
Right.
where there's a will, there's a way. And the best you can do is hope that the defenses you put up are going to be sufficient enough to be able to protect your organization, environment, etc. And you're hitting on the point of why insider threats to me are the single greatest threat that organizations face. While, in my opinion, if you malicious insiders are, you have that likelihood versus damage kind of matrix, right?
Mm-hmm.
While the likelihood of you having a malicious insider that does substantial damage to the organization is relatively low compared to, say, a standard security incident that may result in data loss or data breach and all that. And granted, I think it depends on if we're talking about, say, an offboarding employee who, is a salesperson who's leaving your company who downloads a bunch of data, and that's fairly common, right? But I'm talking about somebody at the Snowden level. It could be in your organization that steals your intellectual property, intent to do damage, kind of that malicious intent, beyond just trying to give them a leg up on their next job. That sort of thing is relatively uncommon. And I hesitate to use that phrase uncommon because it's not truly uncommon, but you're going to face it less in your career, right? But the impact of those events almost always far exceed the impact of a ransomware attack, which is devastating in and of itself, or malware getting on your network and sitting on there for 6 months or 2 years, siphoning off data and those sorts of things. So insider threats are extremely dangerous, even though again they're not quite as likely at this level. So my recommendation is a couple of things. Let me just touch on a couple of the lessons learned I observed from the Snowden thing. Is that insider threat, one, and this is a big common misconception I see when I'm talking to IT and security leaders, is it's not a cybersecurity domain, right? If I've seen too many organizations, they'll put their insider threat program under the head of under the CISO, or maybe even under the CIO. In my opinion, it doesn't necessarily not fit there, but it also might fit better under general counsel or under HR, something like that, because it's really a people issue that you're dealing with, right? And when you're running an insider threat program, you need to be pulling in HR and IT and cybersecurity and finance. You basically need a committee that pulls all these different elements in, right? Depending on how your organization is structured. And as one of the things that exemplifies this is, Ed, prior to his coming to NSA, was a contractor at CIA. And in the congressional report back in, I think it was 2014, 2015, 2016, sometime in that range that it came out, it reported that the CIA had flagged Ed's clearance as he was departing the agency, and then moved over to NSA a month or two later, whatever it was. Now, I'm not sure if it was an issue of timing or what, or if it was just an issue of NSA and CIA not playing nice. But had NSA seen that flag during the investigation, it seems likely to me he would never have gotten access in the first place, right? And so that first lesson that I take away is, well, communication. Does the left hand know in your organization what the right hand is doing? Now, if you're going out hiring somebody from the outside, right, you may not be able to get any good information from the previous company or whatever it may be, right? So there's not quite an apples to apples thing, but certainly when we're managing insider threats, if we treat this as a cybersecurity issue, we're going to miss talking to HR and understanding what their concerns are. Or if you're a factory, talking to the operations team and understanding where the risks that they face are, and really identifying the risks, or past performance of individuals, whatever it may be. So communication, to me, between interdepartmental communication is a really important element to protecting yourself from insiders as you think about what your plans are and intents are, or whatever it may be. Often gets really overlooked. The second thing, again, another softer science, if you will, is soft skill to have in an organization, or just around policies. Like, we're talking cybersecurity and 101 here, but nobody really likes dealing with policies. When I was in the military, heavens knows that I hated policies. I hated when I go into the office, they'd be like, "Oh, why can't I do this?" They're like, "Oh, well, because policy says you can't." And I always hated that answer that I got all the time in the military. But the reality is policies are really important, but they're only as good as they're only worth the paper they're written on, unless you enforce those policies. Exactly. And so you have to have those policies defined, you have the program defined, and then start enforcing those things. And as you're tracking your risks and you're tracking your policy enforcement, you then establish that baseline of strong defenses to be able to protect it. And then it's just due diligence from there, right? You understand what the risks are. you understand what your company's intent is, then it's just enforcing those things. And it's okay. Well, if our biggest concern from an insider is our intellectual property, then what do our DLP policies look like, and what kind of controls do we have around DLP? And we're a cheap company and we don't have a lot of money, so we've always pushed back against going and investing in that big DLP platform. But maybe it's worth doing that if that's where your biggest risk lay. Or if you're a financial services company and you handle a whole bunch of money, well, tightening down and locking down those segments of the network where the financials are all stored and the money is processed and all that becomes pretty important. So I think for organizations who can't go out and do a robust insider threat program, it's establishing an initial committee, identifying your risks around that you face, and what if its loss is going to do you the most damage, and then figure out how to protect those things based upon that, and direct your investment that way, and then invest in monitoring, right? Have a SOC of some sort, and ideally a really good one that can monitor and detect and take action. And then I would add, for our modern day over the last year, how can AI agents help you in faster response times, remediation, locking down things, looking for anomalous behavior within the environment? If you find the right partner with the right types of agents, you can get trained and developed. You can go a lot farther around protecting insider threat.
It's interesting. I have had another guest on the podcast, and I don't think we've released it yet. Andrew Badger, which was one of the co-authors of The Great Heist, about China's espionage campaign against the U.S. and others. But what struck me is the amount and the painful lessons learned from insider threat. I mean, Tesla lost their auto driving capability. Big corporations through naivete. And I think something that we ought to be advising people is you almost have to take an attitude of like we in the cybersecurity world, we always say assume breach, right? Just assume you're breached, work on the assumption that you're in a dirty environment, and everything that you segment up for zero trust, et cetera, is based on a compromised mentality. I honestly believe you almost have to have that way with your employee base, and especially in key positions. Yeah. Like, you would not have known from Ed that he was going to do what he did. Yeah, no the folks that are going to steal, that Andrew and David Shedd illustrate in their book, were very nice, fun-loving, gracious guys and gals. They meant, they had a big community. They bend over backwards for you, et cetera. But they all had huge and ugly impacts on the people around them and the corporations that they worked for. And I almost think you have to have a human assume breach, right? I mean, I want to be friendly with you, but I want to look for things like, I never would have suspected Ed, right? I mean, he's an affable guy. He's really smart. He's always trying to help people. Yep. Really, that was a veneer. And so you kind of have to marry anybody could be your worst nightmare. No one's got that good at EQ, especially if you can pass a full scope poly exam. And then do you have the user behavior analysis that you could add to that to say, what else is being logged into here? And I don't think you need to spend a lot of money on that. Literally, you could put some basic checks in and say, what is anomalous in my environment? Do you agree with that?
Right. And you're spot on. I think one of the first touching on the solutioning, then I want to get to a concern that I've had to coach, or I shouldn't say I've had to, but I've coached some folks through as well. Is you definitely need to have measures in place to be able to monitor your employees, what activities they're engaging in, and what they're doing. There's some really strong technologies out there today. I've been working on implementing some in the organization that I support today, both for our internal security as well with our customers, and really trying to get better visibility into what our users are doing. And it often doesn't even start with the named individual, right? We're kind of irrespective of persons, so to speak.
Right.
It's more of what are the behaviors and indicators that are happening on the network that indicate something bad is happening, and then you tie that to a person, right? So I don't really, regardless of what my opinion of Jim or Susie is, right, personally, and what I may suspect or not suspect, if I see a large amount of data flowing off of my network up to an unauthorized cloud environment, well, that's going to raise a red flag. And it could be the person that I trust the most that sits right next to me doing that. And the person who I've maybe been the most concerned about has been a model citizen. To your point, right? You don't really know. But having those right rules in place for detection, and having the right visibility becomes critical, right? So, having a security operations center with good rules goes a long way. Having a DLP program that not only blocks and protects, but also has some analytics and can detect and provide behavioral type things. I've recently used some SSPM, SaaS security posture management software. We use a product today that I really like a lot, that is providing me a lot of insight into what my users and my company are doing online with different SaaS platforms that we have, that we have accounts for. All of those things give me visibility and go a long way. And then that's also, I'll layer in where the zero trust model comes into play, right? Where zero trust has that network and user based function where, I both want to segment my network to protect it, but I also have to have a segmented user base to contain, what my users have access to. Now, my word of caution, right? And this is always a sticking point as a CISO. Because as a CISO, I put on my CISO hat. I have to worry about security first and foremost. And I saw this at NSA all the time, where it's really easy to fall into biases, and everything you see is inherently malicious, right? And I saw that happening to me when I was at the agency. Quick aside. A particular country that I was working on for many years, I started to view anything I saw them in the news, no matter what it was, with malicious intent. And one day I caught myself doing this. I would read a news article about some police operation in said country. And I thought it was, in my mind, I started thinking about how this is the worst thing in the world, and they're probably using this to attack the US or whatever, when it really wasn't the case. And once I realized that bias, I made it a point of mine. Every day I'd come into work and I would go on to the BBC world of that country, and I'd read articles about them, and both work on my Farsi or I'd just go read English articles if it was a different country that I was focused on or area I was focused on, because I worked different missions. And I would read articles just to learn about their culture and get familiar with them. And remember that everything that I see and came across didn't necessarily indicate something bad and was occurring, right? Or that it was malicious towards us, right? They have their own economic interests and those sorts of things. So that lesson to me, you can also apply this, is where not everything is necessarily bad, but you have to balance your culture. And I think one of the things you can do to exacerbate your insider threat problem is by having a really terrible culture. So while we have this concept of zero trust, right? Of zero trust network access and zero trust identity, et cetera, that concept of zero trust has to be there underlying the way we manage our users, we manage our network, we secure that environment. But you can't let that zero trust mentality come out in the way that you manage your team or build your culture. You actually need a culture of trust, and your users, your people, they need to feel like they're valued, that they're appreciated, and that you trust them to do great work and to do their job well. And that they're going to be honest in what they're doing and work hard. Because if you create a culture, a distrustful culture where you don't trust anybody and everybody's guilty before proven innocent, you're going to create a toxic culture that's going to increase your risk towards insider threat exponentially and make things far harder for you. So as a CISO, and you have to marry your security concerns and your security, you have to balance that with your being a human and your management side and those sorts of things, and work with other people to make sure that the culture is a very healthy culture.
Yeah, that's a great point, and it's all about it is about leadership and leading through crisis. And you bring up a good point, particularly about looking beyond just individual events to sort of see the forest for the trees. There was a song that Sting did about the Russians. It says, "Do the Russians love their children too?" And I remember hearing that in the late '80s, as the wall was falling, and it does struck that there is. Look, at the end of the day, we're all humans. I served with a guy downrange. In fact, I should say that the reason that I did not live through the pain with you is I was deployed to Afghanistan, right? So I thank God for unanswered prayers. I ended up getting deployed, and you had to live through all that hell. But at the end of the day, I had a roommate, and his job was to literally be the early warning system and find the enemy and draw fire, et cetera. Was sort of a scout platoon. And I remember he had one of the hardest jobs because his team felt the impact of the adversary directly. They were shooting at him, literally we're drawing fire. That was his job, to draw them out. And I remember him coming back to the hut one night, and he was talking about it was a really contentious, and they were coming on what effectively was a group of snipers and they managed to overtake the position, and he had to literally restrain some of his soldiers from like crossing that line, for retribution. And he said something really prophetic. He said, I may disagree with everything about these people. I may disagree with their culture, but they're humans and I will treat them humanely. And this was a guy who did this, on the heat of the battlefield, and that really struck me. And I internalized that, and you internalized that, as you still. I mean, you lived through one of the worst things that in our profession you could live through. Yet you came out thinking about the people, how he could be better, and here you are adding your wisdom to other folks. And I've said that I think very highly of you, irrespective of you sort of your social, your social media footprint. The fact that you did lead with calmness and directness, and you took care of people. That says a tremendous amount. I don't mean this to be like mutual admiration society, but I do think it's important that the impact that Snowden had on you as an individual. Pivoting a little bit. Because most people don't really understand the reason why I'm so anti sort of Snowden. And I don't think people fully appreciate that in the mechanisms in the intelligence agency, both at any aspect of the intelligence agencies, there are mechanisms that you and I had freely available to us when we thought something was amiss.
That's right.
Whether it be anonymous or one that could be attributable to us, but there was always a mechanism. Like the Intelligence Oversight Committee had a rep there, Team Legal had a rep there. There was always a door that you could walk through with no repercussions if you believed someone was violating law or policy. And this idea that Snowden was somehow revealing abuses against the U.S. population, et cetera. But what that belies is that, and I want our audience to understand, our intelligence agencies and our government, in particular in this arena, do have an incredible amount of seriousness around the protection of our civil rights. And to hear all this bullshit about, he had to do this. He didn't have any other way to bring it to he had to bring attention to the public. That is so much horse shit. Like, it makes me gag. Like there are so many mechanisms that were available to the people on the team to be able to report perceived abuses that would have been actioned. I mean, like people have gone to jail for being reported in through those channels, right? So, what are your thoughts on sort of that?
Man, you're hitting on my biggest frustration with the messaging around Snowden, and I'm not going to change people's minds, right, all the time. A lot of people, especially on this topic, are particularly set in their opinions, right? But I have had a lot of people go to me and like, oh, I view this completely differently now. But you're spot on, right? So let me highlight a few things. One, touching on your point about NSA taking it seriously. I remember training after training in the 9-10 years that I was there, 12 years, however long I was there, constantly about these sorts of things. About not only did we have CI training where we got taught all about these people who had betrayed their country and those sorts of things in the past, but we were trained constantly around how to handle sensitive data. How do we handle not only U.S. data if we come across it, but how to handle Five Eyes data? What we can and we couldn't query, what we couldn't search, these sorts of things. We had people auditing our actions every day. I had people coming to me saying, "Hey, why did you do this?" Even though it wasn't anything outside of the rules, they were like, "Okay, this is a little bit outside of, say, the normal mission. Why did you do this?" And I would explain. Okay, good. So they were very, very concerned about it. And I specifically remember trainings and seminars and sitting. I remember sitting in the big, what is it called? The auditorium at the agency, right? And the director of NSA is up there speaking, or one of his deputies anyway, saying, we have to be very diligent that we are following the law to the letter, not just the spirit, but to the letter. Make sure we're following the law, so that, because we can't afford to have more scandals hit us like there was back around 9/11 and those sorts of things. So they took it really seriously. Now, does it mean there weren't abuses? No, I'm sure there were abuses, and some of those abuses were outed by Snowden, but certainly not to the extent. So that's point number one, is the NSA did take it seriously. Point number two is one of the big frustrations I had about Ed's story is Ed both portrays himself as well as the supporters that he was an expert in all things intelligence and all things of NSA operations. Well, Ed was an IT guy, an IT admin up until April of 2013, and he left. He disappeared from my team on May 20th, 2013. So we're talking about a month and a half at most, right, where he was an intelligence analyst. So up until that time, he was, and just like every good organization, you have separation of duties, right? So, if as a company like you're at Cape Endeavors, for instance, I'm sure you've got your finance people handling all the money and everything, but they may not be able to. They're not the IT admins, and they can't go adjust the way that certain servers are run and all that. Similarly, your IT people probably can't go edit and alter the data that your financial people are using sitting on those servers. NSA is the same way, right? The intelligence folks have different controls, different responsibilities, different training, different insights, than the IT folks. And the IT folks have their own rules and responsibilities, etc. So as Ed is coming across all of this, and as Ed is really starting to gather this intelligence, I think in his mind he starts seeing things that he views to be illegal or outside of what's acceptable, and never takes the time to understand what controls were in place. Right? He only went through the trainings in that kind of first month that he moved over to my team and began getting familiar with it. And by that point, he was committed. Like he's admitted that he targeted the role that I had open. He knew what he was going to do come hell or high water. So there was nothing that any training he was going to get was going to stop him. But the fact that he comes out and tries to interpret what these intelligence programs were and how they operated and what they did is just laughable, because he never used those programs. He never had insight into them. And if he did, and he didn't, by the way, and a couple of the ones that he outed, I had been read into and had familiarity with. It was a complete misconception of what was actually happening and the way that the controls were in place, right? Then the third thing that irritates me is if Ed were as altruistic as he claimed to be, and if he and I do want to caveat, right, that I can acknowledge, and I do acknowledge frequently, that there were every major crisis, every bad thing has good things come out of it, and there were positives to come out of the Snowden situation. So not things like our awareness of privacy and those sorts of things I think were really important. But that said, if Ed were truly as altruistic as he claimed to be, then how is it that almost nothing of what he released had anything to do with illegal activity coming up on the part of the United States, right? So I went through every release in 2013 that he exposed through the media, and I categorized them as either foreign intelligence, and foreign intelligence would be anything within NSA's charter, right? So it's a legitimate legal foreign intel that NSA is allowed to conduct, right? It would be capability, which would be we have the capability to do something, right, technology-wise, but there's no context around where we're using it to spy on Americans, where we're using it to perpetrate foreign intelligence, right? So I would argue the whole thing around PRISM that was launched at that very first article would be a capability thing. The NSA has a capability against these technologies, but there's no context in how it was used. And then the third category was domestic surveillance, illegal domestic surveillance, right? Well, none fit that third category of all the things that were released, right? A lot hit that second category, and Ed's interpretation would have moved it into that third category if he were correct, which he wasn't, right? But the vast majority, 100%, 99 to 100% of everything was legitimate legal foreign intelligence that was within NSA's charter. So if one is truly as altruistic and wants to protect the American people from its overbearing government, then he wouldn't have allowed those other things to be released, right? He would have strictly kept it to the pure whistleblowing type data that was evidence of illegal activity on the part of the U.S. So that's my biggest thing is what China did at this particular time, or we did against China, have anything to do with America spying on U.S. citizens,
on Americans, and it didn't. And in fact, it bears repeating. Like, so I the program that I was in charge of, look, I had Title 50 authorities and Title 10 authorities. Like, I literally had presidential authority to see both.
Right.
But that didn't mean I had unfettered access to any systems. Look, literally, there were analysts on my team where I could not see the thing that they did every day.
Right.
Like I did not have a need to know. Like they
Right.
were in charge of these particular systems with their particular mission, and they were in my umbrella organization. That didn't mean I could shoulder surf. Like I mean, like people don't understand. These things are ultra segmented for a reason. They're segmented for, you know, where did the sourcing of this information come from, you know, mission, need to know, and context is everything, as you point out. But it's all bullshit, because at the end of the day, if he had believed any of those things were being misused, you know, the Intelligence Oversight Committee door was right, like literally down the hall. Literally, you could walk out and walk down there and make a claim, right? I mean,
yeah, and at no point did he, and no matter what he's tried to say, and he's kind of claimed it tacitly, but there's zero evidence of it. It didn't come out in the congressional report, and certainly never happened with me. At no point did he raise his concerns to anybody of any authority, whether it was me, the lowly manager who managed his team, who was a nobody at NSA, or it was, you know, oversight and compliance, or the director of NSA. You know, at no point did he ever raise any of that.
Yeah, you know, it's ironic because, you know, I would say the damage he did to the American population far exceeded any even if what he wanted to say was altruistic, was in fact that was his clear motivation, which it wasn't. But assuming it was, the outcome was way more deadly to the folks participating in sort of the defense of our nation than.
I mean, not only the potential lives lost, right, but I mean the billions upon billions of dollars necessary for NSA to rip and replace its entire construct.
Yep.
I mean, that, you know, the economic impact alone was pretty significant. I think often gets overlooked.
Yeah, and we enabled our adversary by revealing sources and capabilities, and so all we did was embolden the adversary. There's a reason why he's now a Russian citizen, right?
Well, that should tell you everything you need to know about the last
exactly
12 years.
Interestingly enough, but Steve, I guess what by the way, I didn't ask you. We got a few minutes left.
Yeah.
I haven't talked to you about your current role. Where are you working? What are you doing?
Thanks.
What do they do for the community?
Yeah, so I work for a managed services provider called Cortelligent. We manage the IT infrastructure for a variety of organizations, and they've you know, a lot of small companies, mid-sized companies who have really important businesses that you know, whether it's finance or biotech or a variety of other industries, who, you know, may not quite be the size to necessitate a full IT team, a full cybersecurity team. And so we are a managed services provider, and I run our cybersecurity. So I'm both the internal CISO of the organization, as well as I'm responsible for our cybersecurity services that we offer and deliver.
Well, that's awesome. And so Cortelligent, if you're needing MSP services, to those in the audience, I want to say thank you, Steve, for your unwavering commitment to the United States, our citizens, the defense of our nation, both you know, in government and commercially. You know, I think that you went through hell, and not by anything you did, you know, it was unfortunate, but you know, in some respects, the country should be glad it was you, because it could have been a lot worse. You know, the ramifications, damage, and the covering up and the blame storming could have been, I think, a lot worse. But you were the right person at the right time, and maybe that was, you know, in the grand scheme of things, maybe it was better for all of us that you were that guy that took the high road and took the more even keel, and maybe lesser people would have broken or done the unethical thing. And so I think the country owes you a debt of gratitude. And I'd like to say thank you, Steve, for not only what you've done, but also being on my podcast.
Yeah, and thank you, Terry. I appreciate you having me here, and also thank you for your service. And I love the time we had to work together. And I also want to shout out to your military counterpart, who's kind of there. You mentioned a job was to draw out the fire in Afghanistan. I mean, those are the guys that that go through the fire, right? I mean, I went through this and it sucked. But I was in Hawaii sitting on the beach while you guys were out there, you know, doing that stuff. And I can't express my appreciation enough to you and all of your fellow soldiers out there who put their lives on the line like that. So,
yeah, I appreciate it. It was always my honor and privilege.